We're about to start. All right, thank you very much. I'll take this opportunity to riff for a moment, so people will probably get the message that they're supposed to be in here, to thank Naomi. She's our AV person right now, and also riff on what Naomi did earlier. When Christy J. Wells' talk played the tape that was digitized, it reminded me very strongly about some things that Whitney was saying in terms of compression. And I think that these resonances are kind of important, because I don't really have a paper here or anything like that, but I do want to draw our attention to our bodies and our ears in this particular room and to the infrastructures around us. But I hope Whitney will agree with me that that recording was decidedly uncompressed or decidedly unlimited, unmastered. And Whitney was saying that compression does this thing where, it brings the loudest parts down and, relatively speaking, the quiet parts up, and then you can pump the whole thing up so you can, homogeneous, so you can hear things. And then when the music was very, very quiet, but the narration was relatively easy to hear, you could tell, there's a historical different standard to how things are, mixed and mastered, and also what we're accustomed to and what technology can deal with. And it actually made me think of a question for you, and please don't answer it, but there's compression, which does the thing I just mentioned, and then there's riding the fader. So someone could have potentially been riding the fader when Count Basie is playing light things in his right hand. And it just kind of reminded me how it made me, it made Bob O'Mealy go perk our ears up, it made us look over at Naomi. Naomi came in, she rode the fader a little bit, and she performed the work in a very active human way that a compressor might do, sort of. And it also drew the attention to me that sound makes you do things. Like, that was a situation where sound made me do something, made Professor O'Mealy do something, and Naomi do something, and she did a wonderful job. Now, I'm going to introduce Michael Heller. Michael Heller is a musicologist, associate professor, and department chair of the music department at Brandeis University. He's the author of 2 books, both with the University of California Press. The first, titled Loft Jazz, Improvising New York in the 1970s, examines musicians, collectives, and artist organizing strategies amid a period of disruptive urban post-war restructuring in New York City, a period which became known as the loft scene. This study was named one of the 5 best books of 2017 by the New York City Jazz Record and received the 2016 H. Earl Johnson publication subvention from the Society for American Music. His second is a 2023 collection of sound studies essays titled Just Beyond Listening, Essays of Sonic Encounter, which received a subvention from the American Musicological Society. Heller has published additional research and reviews in Jazz Research Journal, Sound Studies, Jazz Perspectives, and the Journal of the American Musical Society. Since 2018, he has also served as founding editor-in-chief of the journal Jazz and Culture, published by the University of Illinois Press. His most recent project is collaborating with percussionist and Jimi Hendrix band member Juma Sultan in writing Sultan's autobiography, tentatively titled Tales of a Wandering Griot. The title of his talk today is Play Streets and Movable Seats, Presenting Jazz in Improvised Spaces. Please welcome Michael Heller.
Thanks so much. Very happy to be here. Thank you to Tom for the invitation. Thank you to Yolanda for everything that she does for everyone all the time. She's amazing and is a bright light in this community. And thanks, as always, to Bob Amelia as well for all your work. I mean, there's too many people to thank. I want to thank everybody. Before I dive in, two sort of administrative things. One is, like a few other people have said, I'm also a Columbia alum. I'm very happy to be back. It's been a long time. I was an undergrad here many years ago. It is fascinating, and I don't have too much to say about it, though, to be at a conference about space and to come back to a campus that is having the space so much differently policed right now. It's an odd feeling, and I don't have anything deeper to say right now on that, but we could sit with it. The second thing, just by way of introduction, I knew that this was going to be a day with many brilliant colleagues, many of whom I've known and worked with for a long time. And it's been amazing to see a lot of projects that are incredibly polished, publication ready. My presentation is not at that point yet. This is work that I'll give the preface is simultaneously too old and too new. Too old in the sense that I'm revisiting some of the material that I from my 2016 book on loft jazz. I have a chapter on space there, and just to have the opportunity to talk about that with such wonderful colleagues, I wanted to take some time to revisit that. And then too new because some of the newer elements, newer ideas, I'm just in the process of adapting, and so I really offer them in that sense of experimentation and to have an open discussion with everyone. So thank you very much. And I've also called a few audibles based on other things happening today, so I'll be jumping around in a few places. But I want to begin with this individual right here, Professor Hetty Fox. I had the great pleasure of interviewing Professor Fox and spending an afternoon with her in 2009 when I was working on what became the Loft book. Born in 1937, Fox had come up a number of times in other conversations I had had with musicians about the 1970s. And usually she was referred to by one of two names. One was her childhood nickname of Bunchy, and the other was as Professor Fox. And this was not a mere sign of respect. Professor Fox had earned her doctorate in sociology at Valley State College, which is now Cal State Northridge, in the 1960s, and worked in university settings for about 7 years before returning to the East Coast. We met inside of Fox's home, which was located on a small one-block street called Lyman Place in the South Bronx. This was actually the same block where she had grown up. She wasn't born there, but moved there when she was a young child. And the house that we spoke in had several different uses on the block. It was her home, but it was also an important community center, an after-school programming center, and the headquarters for where she operated a community group right there on Lyman Place. The walls around us were adorned with posters that showed simple greetings, and as well as the numbers 1 through 10 in several languages. And this was part of a goal and philosophy of exposing the people on the block to a variety of different world cultures. During the time we talked together, many people walked in and out of the house from the neighborhood. Just some had specific questions and some just to say hello. One of them was a young man named Caesar who had been one of her earliest kids at the after school, and now he was in the process of starting his own nonprofit organization. And it was just an inspiring afternoon all around. We talked about a lot of things that afternoon. We talked about her musical work. That's where the conversation started. She was a percussionist. Her biggest jazz claim to fame is she went on a tour of Europe with Ornette Coleman in 1974. But she also led groups for many years in New York, including an all-women group named Pre-Search that included many musicians, including Akua Dixon, pianist Renee Botafacino, and others. We talked about her family background. She had a fascinating artistic family, including an uncle named James Ingram Fox, who was a composer, and he wrote a opera about the 18th century Fulani scholar Usman Danfodio. She talked a great deal about that. And we talked about her sociological work, her time at Valley State. But probably we spent the most time talking about her organizing work right there on Lyman Place. And it's here that I sort of want to connect Fox's work to the themes of the conference in terms of the way she negotiated space and place in this location. She described coming back to the block after 8 years in California in the year 1970. And she talked about how different the South Bronx felt at that time from how it had growing up. It's well documented that at the time the South Bronx was a center for economic divestment, so-called urban renewal programs that devastated the communities that were living there, including responses in the aftermath of building major highway projects like the Cross Bronx Expressway. And this also led to a wave of arson for profit that's been well documented. There's a documentary called The Bronx is Burning for anyone interested. And Fox spoke about all this in our interview. As she put it at one point, when I came home to New York, the whole place smelled like, I don't know, old coffee, bleach, gas leak. Everything smelled different. It seemed so dead. People were riding the subway like they were zombies. It was scary. I did not know what was going on or what was wrong, but I could sense that something was terribly wrong. The whole dynamic in the city of New York just seemed to be just flat. Lyman Place was affected by all of this, and Fox recalled several of the buildings on the block had been taken over by what she called vandals. And as she got back, she got right to work, working to reclaim those houses and repurpose them as community spaces. She had family members at the time that were pushing her to get out, saying, you know, the neighborhood is dead, you get somewhere safe. And she didn't do that. Instead, she decided to stay there and fight. And she described nights where she would sleep with her boots on because she didn't know if something was going to come crashing through the window, if someone was going to come through. One way that she described this was through children's games that she had played on the block. She said, when we were young, we would play games like Ring Alivio or Hot Peas and Butter on the block. All the games required you to guard home base, and we took that stuff very seriously. They wouldn't even let you on the team if you couldn't play right. So when I came home, the first thing that came to my mind when I saw the Bronx was deteriorating was, who's guarding home base? Professor Fox would go on to do everything she could to guard that home base for nearly 50 years, up until her passing in the year 2019. One by one, she saved buildings and set up community organizations. But perhaps her longest running initiative was to earn an official city designation as what was called a play street. This wasn't her, she wasn't the first to do this. This was an official city program in which 51% of the residents on a given block had to vote to implement this. And what it meant was that you could close the street for traffic for a large part of the day to allow kids to play there and set up programming, set up tutoring stations, games. She would have Jazzmobile come regularly each year and do this. And she ran this play street for years. Her fundraising was all done by herself, and she described that a lot of it was literally by walking door to door around Manhattan. She would walk for miles and sometimes described leaving early in the morning and walking till 10 at night, knocking on doors, going into businesses, and just describing what she was trying to do on Lyman Place and soliciting any funding that she could. At a time when a lot of politicians, including multiple US presidents, were visiting the South Bronx only to use it as a sort of backdrop for video files to show something, a place that was bombed out and in need of their policies, of course, she advocated for leaders to come and see the living South Bronx, the place where she was building hope and reform on a community level. And that's what the Play Street represented to her. Not a community that was dying, but a community that was reimagining itself and protecting itself, rethinking what it could be down to what was happening on the streets themselves. Now, Fox's efforts have been covered elsewhere. She's been the subject of New York Times interviews, and she has an oral history at Fordham University's Bronx African American History Project. But to give a little bit of a sense of hers. There was a CBS News feature in the 1980s that covered her, and I thought I'd play a couple minutes of this short feature now. Woo! So what I want to do today is to sort of think about what happens if we think of the implications of Professor Fox's work as informing some aspects of jazz presentation that she was connected to through her work in various loft capacities, but also perhaps to link this to broader streams of thought, particularly connecting ideas of both claiming and reclaiming spaces and places, but also to create avenues for reimagining what a place might be. Because this reimagining is something that I encountered a lot from musicians, but this is a particularly powerful instance of it. And one expression of this, I'm not going to read this whole quote just for time, was expressed by Fox herself in terms of building something new in a space. And she told me, after leaving an era in California where so much was going on in terms of the revolution of the 1960s, I found a Bronx that had fallen down. There was no need for revolution. I said, look at this. We have a fresh, clean slate here. So you have to shift gears. You can't talk about how you're going to maneuver around the things that are in place. They all disappeared. So now we have to ask what we want to see grow here. What do we want to see happen? Now, this idea of reimagining and cultivating freedom in spaces, freedom dreams in the sense talked about by Robin Kelly, out of the detritus of devastation is something that I saw carrying through to a lot of artistic pursuits that I was studying as well. And in fact, Fox, in interesting ways, would sometimes link this to aesthetic concerns. For example, she talked at one point about graffiti. on the emergence of graffiti in New York. She said, "I saw the emergence of graffiti. It first began to appear on the subways especially. People were outraged. They were riding up and down the subway, paying their fare, and sitting there like zombies. Little old ladies are on the subway saying, 'This is terrible. How dare these children, these wayward juvenile delinquents come up and do this? Vandalism. How dare they?' But I'm riding the subway, and I see this artwork start to splash about. And I say, oh my God, look at that. That's fantastic. These people are complaining, and the art woke them up. It gave them a stroke of life." Again, we see these tropes of reimagining space, in this case, the walls of a subway becoming the canvas for something of artistic practice, that I see as connected to a lot of self-organized jazz work and musician-organized jazz initiatives that I talk about. And so that's where I'd like this to go, to think about if we take the logic of the play street, this creative claiming and reimagining, and think about it in broader streams. So I'm going to connect this to some other ideas that I talk about in my book, particularly involving categories that have come up several times today about space and place. Space and place, it's a distinction that cultural geographers like Yifu Tuan and others talk about. And in a simple sense, places or space is described as a way of thinking about a locality that frames it in terms of its openness and possibility, whereas place refers to the actual presences within a given location. So the people who are there, the objects that are there, the memories and lives within a given place. And framed this way, place in some literature is framed as a way of opposing erasure, particularly erasure following the logic of colonialism, by championing local meanings and local presences as being there and being accessible. So when you think of like a colonial power dividing up a conquered territory, that's a logic of space, right? They're not acknowledging the presences that are there in the room. Or there in the location. I keep wanting to say space, but you got to avoid the terms itself. So in those kind of narratives, space becomes a model of oppressive erasure, where place becomes a mode of defiance and defense of the local. But in other spheres, including with a lot of musicians who I spoke to from this period, I heard exactly the opposite, in which space became a way of thinking through a liberatory form of reimagining, of crafting new dreams of creativity, community, and control, particularly the types of control that are denied by oppressive systems and oppressive policies. As one example of this, when I was writing about lofts, so these are performance spaces set up in old industrial buildings, and if you read architectural writings about loft conversion in like design magazines, a lot of them focus on the specific things that are there in the space. They sort of fetishize the industrial past. You know, there's a freight elevator, there's an exposed beam. And what I found was that musicians very rarely, to me, talked about those aspects. Instead, they tended to talk much more about the spaces in terms of the openness and the possibilities that they engendered. Spaces that they could turn into anything, be it a concert hall, a rehearsal room, an art gallery, etc. I've just put together a few quotes. Oh, here's a photo of a loft. So you see it's an open space. Seating is set up and pillows on the floor in this instance, which will connect to the second paradigm I want to talk about of the movable seat in a little while. But the quotes, here's just a few quotes from musicians that exemplified this. Cooper Moore told me, in the building, the loft, the space, it was a tool. It was a way we could become something else because we weren't pressured. It was about developing. John Fisher said you could do any number of things with a space. You could have jugglers, you could have clowns, you could have dancers, you could have musicians, you could have discussions, name it. Dave Burrell said, once you had a space, it could be anything. So as I said in the book, I write a lot about the ramifications this might have for the loft era. And one way to think of it might be in terms of an admonition of Sun Ra. And before you think, I'm not taking the low-hanging fruit here. And I want to congratulate that we've had a day of talks on space and place without a single space is the place reference. We are hip. All right. But instead, I want to think of another Sun Ra mantra that the orchestra invokes. And that's this one right here. If we came from somewhere here, why can't we go somewhere there? We can think of this exhortation as a sort of move from an oppressive emplacement to a liberatory, what we might call, enspacement. that we don't have to be tied down to a single place, be it a geographical location like Birmingham, Alabama, a terrestrial sphere like the Earth itself, or a conceptual confine like the oppressive politics of America, or the general white supremacist capitalist patriarchy, to use Bell Hooks' term. This was central to a lot of aspects of what Rob referred to as the altered destiny, the possibilities of opening up space as a conceptual way for imagining other modes of being. Now, into other forms of practice, there's a large variety of musician-run activities in jazz, particularly the jazz avant-garde, which I focus on, that you could draw out these kind of improvised ethoses in. It's all over the work of the AACM, the Black Artist Group, the UGMAA, many, many different community organizations. One that I just wanted to talk about here is an organization that I worked with here in New York for a number of years and still do some volunteer work with, which is the Vision Festival. Run by an organization named Arts for Art, which was founded by the choreographer Patricia Nicholson Parker. In 2005, when I was working with the festival, it was entering its 10th year, and they self-published a small book that you see up here called Vision Festival Peace. And on the cover, what you see, and there's no indication for a reader of what this is, you sort of had to be in the know, but you see 6 small photos of different doors presented without comment. Now, only a real festival devotee at the time would have recognized that these doors were the entrances to the 6 different locations that the festival had taken place in at that time. And nearly all of these were spaces that were repurposed in one way or another. There is a community education center called the Learning Alliance, that's the middle right. I don't know why they did it in the order they did. 2 different churches, one is St. Nicholas of Myra and the other is St. Patrick's, both on the Lower East Side. There's a former synagogue turned into an art center, the lower left, the Angel Orensan Center. One former nightclub, the Electric Circus, and then only one was a then currently operating music venue, and that was the Knitting Factory when it was in its location on Leonard Street. So this cover already is playing on a number of themes. That first, it's drawing a concrete history of the festival up to that year. Second, it's marking the struggle that's undergone by the festival to locate a permanent space, which is always a challenge for community organizations in New York. Third, it foregrounds the range of spatial reimaginings that the festival had to undertake, converting a church and an educational center and all these different spaces into temporary homes for their festival community. And fourth, it was performing a sort of welcoming function by focusing on the image of the door, a sort of liminal point where one enters in and joins this vision community. Space was always a problem for Vision. To this day, they still struggle with it. They're in their 27th year, I believe now. And Patricia was always looking to identify different possibilities for locating spaces. And she had very specific ideas about what she wanted in a festival space. And one of them that might seem a little bit surprising is that she was very insistent, at least on a conceptual level, with the idea of movable seats. So in other words, not like a fixed stadium seating, but something like folding chairs or even chairs like you're sitting in right now. This was very conceptually important to her. It's interesting because it might seem to mark a sort of informality or amateurism even. You don't find them in opera houses or very formal venues. But for Patricia, and I don't have a quote for her on this, I was just talking to her about it again last night. She stresses the idea that this informality was very intentional to evoke the kind of community atmosphere that she wanted in the festival. That she was very invested in the idea that there shouldn't be a stark separation between the audience of listeners and the artists. She wanted people to feel approachable, and indeed that's when the festival was really working, it does feel that way, that you can go and interact and talk. So one of the spaces, probably the favorite space of many Vision Festival devotees, is this space right here, the Angel Orensan Center, which is down on, I believe, Norfolk Street. This was location for several years early on in the festival. They are badly priced out of it now. They charge a lot of money to have events there now. But Orensan's was an old former synagogue that had been taken over by an artist named Angel Orensands, and his brother Al Orensands was the administrator there, which functioned as just a wide open space. You can sort of see the location of it. It's a big empty floor. There's these huge 55-foot vaulted ceilings. What is used as the stage area was the bima, the area where the celebration would take place. And then the rest of the floor is just wide open, and the festival would set up movable seating there. But that wasn't it. On the second level, you see there's also a balcony that wraps all the way around. And Patricia would use that both as an art gallery, because they present visual artists at the festival each year as well, but also as a point of commerce and conversation among festival goers. So they would have people set up stands to sell CDs, both artists and record labels. And if you wanted to take a break, you could go up to that second floor, still be within earshot and eyeshot of the music, but you could sort of have a moment to yourself. You could chat with other people. You could interact with artists and so forth. So this was sort of the platonic ideal for vision until they were priced out of it. What's interesting is that this idea of movable seats, I want to stress that it's more conceptual than don't take it too literally. And in fact, actually, as I was talking to Patricia last night, she was noting that the festival is moving again this year from a place that had movable seats to a place that had fixed seating, but that other aspects of this place do facilitate this kind of community atmosphere. So the movable seats is a concept rather than something literal. Now again, a large part of the Vision Festival we can see as connected to longer streams in DIY jazz presentations in various locations. Somehow I've lost my place here. I'm going to off books. Well, I'll do it. But you see these kind of repurposed spaces all over the place, and it's not only within lofts or festival settings. Oh no, I know where I was going with this, that it's not only indoor spaces as well, that there's an overlap between this ideal, the logic of the play street and the logic of the movable seat that I see repeated many times in what I'm calling improvised spaces. It's come up a lot in my current work. Tom mentioned that I'm working on Juma Sultan and writing his autobiography. And Juma, it seems like throughout his career, really foregrounded improvised sorts of spaces. Not just in jazz either. That one instance that he talks about is that he was involved in organizing a troupe of drummers to play at the Human Be-In, which was like a big countercultural event in San Francisco's Golden Gate Park in 1967. And Juma lined up drummers for about a half-mile walkway when you entered the park to the main staging area to, as he put it, saturate the audience with sound from the minute they walked in. At the same time that he was doing this, around the same period, Juma was also involved in playing at house parties for the Black Panther Party when they were just emerging in San Francisco. So another sort of repurposed spaces. And that's where I sort of want to go next, is to think not only about the idea of improvised space as something that permeates alternative or avant-garde or DIY spaces, but what happens, and this is the part of the talk where I'm going to get increasingly sort of like expansive in what we might apply this to a point where maybe you say, this is not useful anymore, but just sort of to play around with this idea and think through what it might offer us. Because I think that you can see this ideas, these logics of play streets and movable seats throughout jazz history. One example would be something like the parade tradition that we've already talked about several times today. Because what is a parade if not some sort of mode of reclaiming public space, using music as a tool for asserting control of someone, and that someone might be an oppressive power if it's in the case of like a state-sanctioned military parade, or it could be a community organization or community, just a community, as we see in a lot of the second line traditions that we've talked about. And other musicians have talked about sort of the political, or other scholars rather, have talked about the political implications of this. I'm thinking of people like Thomas Brothers talking about how Louis Armstrong's early parade experience provided a form of access to a city that would have largely been off limits to a young black artist. Or more recently, Ben Barson's research on how parades and other activities give rise to a form of jazz commons in early New Orleans that undertook political work and anti-capitalist spaces for resistance and joy. And anyone who has ever been caught up in a parade, in New Orleans especially, if you're on the street, and you can see how quickly logics of space get rearranged and renegotiated at that particular moment. Another example we might think through is that of the Rent Party. Rent Party, another canonical, legendary space in jazz, is rooted in this idea of sort of movable seats idea, right? Of changing what was a domestic space into something that sort of follows the logic of the benefit concert and the nightclub and the dance hall all wrapped into one. Let's see, skipping through some things because I want to leave time for discussion as well. So maybe the last place I'll go, and this is where, if you're with me so far, you're going to drop off. What if we take it even further? Because maybe this idea is too broad. Maybe this idea of an improvised space raises too many questions about what we mean by this, like what does and doesn't count as an improvised space. And I'm here, I'll admit, I'm very much thinking of New York as an example. But you could make the argument that nearly all spaces of jazz performance are in one way or another improvised or renegotiated within the architectural and city planning framework of New York that is the storefront, right? The storefront is designed as a space that can be flexible for various circumstances. And if you start to trace through even canonic venues, many of them have prehistories that were not as jazz venues necessarily. So in my book, I talk about one of the lofts called Studio We, which was previously a tenement building. It was the site of a Jewish congregation called Aka Yosef. It was the head of the Pakistan League of America for a time, and it had many, many residents in the early 20th century, most of whom were immigrants from Eastern Europe, all before loft musicians came and turned it into a community-based art center. I started doing a little bit of research, and this is where it's very nascent, because I think you could do this with practically any space. And I took a quick look yesterday, and this is like, I might not even be right about the next slide. So of all the things to not take away from this, don't take away this. But I started looking up building records on the Village Vanguard, and Kim Thiel might know more about this, to sort of see what it was before it was the Village Vanguard. And interestingly, I did not find very much. But I did find that in the earliest record that I could locate, and this is through very quick city record searches, on the left, that bottom floor where the Vanguard is simply listed as a store with an occupancy possibility of 15 people. And it's just a few years later, so that's 1921. If you look in overhead, just a couple years later in 1923, it's repurposed as a club. And that's why you see that jump from 15 to 75, and it's a club. And this was all many years before it's set up as the Vanguard in 1935. But what if we go further? What if we think about even the improvised elements of a space like the Savoy Ballroom that Christy J brought up a little while ago? Now, the Savoy, to be sure, was very much designed as a performance space on its interior. But I was watching a documentary about it recently and thinking through its role within this block, right? That the Savoy is on the second floor. This is a slightly later photos from 1952. But it's nestled above a furniture store, a luncheonette. At this point, there's a chocolate store and a photo studio. Can we think of this as some sort of improvisation or negotiation or renegotiation of the logic of the block within a New York setting? Again, maybe this renders the whole concept meaningful. If everything is improvised, then what are we even doing here? I don't know the answer to that, and that's where the work is still developing. But to me, the point that becomes interesting is thinking about how practitioners, particularly artists in my work, but also organizers, producers, and listeners, have had to undertake the labor to transform existing spaces into performance spaces at particular moments in time. Work, and I say labor both in the form of conceptual labor and in the form of actual physical labor. Again, the loft stories are saturated with this, stories of people repointing brickwork and building stages out of milk crates and everything else you can imagine. So to wrap up, I want to end just by reiterating a point that I've often made about my work on lofts, which is that by shining light and thinking about a tradition of improvised or self-created or DIY spaces within jazz settings, I don't want to romanticize these approaches as imagining that they're somehow ideal. And this is a space where a lot of musicians were critical of the loft movement, that they complained that critics would imagine that lofts were seen as the right place to hear music, and implicit in that the idea that this is not music for the concert hall or for the university or for any larger spaces of cultural cachet, and musicians were rightly offended by that ideal. It reminds me of a quote, a New York Times quote from Archie Shepp that I think about a lot. Shepp wrote, or he said in this quote, "It is also a matter of responsibility because we are forced into stereotypes when a black child has to learn about black music in a bar." And I take these critiques seriously in lofts and elsewhere, and it's not my intent to sort of lionize, the sort of rough and ready aesthetic. But again, the larger goal is to acknowledge the work that is being done, both musically by people like Juma Sultan, but also on a community level by people like Hetty Fox, in revisiting spaces and imagining them for new modes of interaction and new modes of artistic practice. So I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Michael, thank you for that. I see a through line with this and Christie's conclusion and Kimberly's piece about the festivals and the trope of architecture. It almost evokes the presence of Michael Veal and his analysis of like Le Corbusier and the cantilevers and things like this in practices of vandalizing miles in culture. But to think here today, it's like a critical architecture of the audiences and communities and neighborhoods and things like this to think about spaces and so forth. This particular expression makes me wonder about romanticism, and in Wiley Hitchcock's sort of coinage of cultivated vernacular and the appreciation of the concert hall and the industrial north and things like this. But specifically, what animates those architectural moves is in romanticism, correct me if I'm wrong, the musicologist at the end of the day here, is really this response to the French Revolution and the sort of rise of a different sort of space and a conjuring of a specific sort of religiosity or a kind of simulacrum, I guess, thinking of Baudrillard, but the matter of the quiet audience member who's there in a prayer-like state in that fixed seat that so much money from steel, and imagine all the magnates funding the hall in your favorite city. But jazz and its spatializations as a reaction to even that, and not just the other associations to what had been called cultivated or something like this. I'm wondering about the eerie, ghostly presence of that ideology as a pretext for the beautiful significance of the movable seat and the storefront and the bar that Archie Shepp, you say, is opining for good reason, but like opining in the face of the concert hall, which has its own baggage and things like that. I wonder if you could speak to that.
Yeah, I could say a couple of things. I mean, one is that the thing to keep in mind in the loft movement is that as underground spaces, there's some ways in which musicians didn't have the luxury of thinking about architecture, at least in a larger structural sense, right? That the concern was more about how can we get control of a certain kind of space, right? And for a moment, and the sort of whole underlying impetus of the loft period, is that was possible because of changes in real estate, the real estate market, in ways that it's not possible today. And even by the 1970s was already quickly going away. So it was less about thinking, again, in terms of what structures are there, but what they could think about was how a room was arranged and sort of what activities were going there. And that's when you go to look at this horribly grainy picture, but at least it gets the idea across. The idea of, where did it go? There we go. Of those kind of spaces, that the choice of how people are organized in that room is affecting a certain kind of social relationship, right? The musicians aren't raised up. You could build a small stage. Some places had small stages. Ornette's artist house had a little stage just to separate. But in many cases, it was sort of this calculatedly informal aesthetic that was developed in connection with it. Now, where this becomes interesting to me as well is in something contemporary like the Vision Festival. Because the Vision Festival does have a little bit more leeway in terms of thinking about their spaces. They're not, flush with cash, but they can think about what kind of venues they want to be in and have made a very conscious choice, not out of necessity, but out of a desire to cultivate these relationships, to maintain some aspect of this. They don't have pillows on the floor, but they want there to be a sort of interaction and interactability between spaces. So, yeah.
Thank you, Michael. First, you asked a question. I think you said, like, if everything's improvised, then what are we even doing here? Which seems like you've cut to kind of the core of philosophy and theology with that question. So, yeah, I think that's a useful question. But I think you're being like maybe a little, I hope, just self-deprecating in terms of how useful this stuff. Because I'm thinking, like, if Henri Lefebvre were in the audience, he'd be like, right on, man, with the way you're.
Well, thank you. I appreciate
talking about the kind of social production of space. But I wanted to ask you about constraint and creativity and where that fits into this, just because when I'm thinking about various improvisatory traditions, whether we're thinking about in jazz or even thinking like Second Viennese School and the birth of serialism and all that, there's this kind of like tension between when is a blank slate too blank to be helpfully spurring in creativity, and when, whether it's like having rhythm changes or 12-bar blues does having like some kind of structure to either work within or or signify against spur creativity in terms of improvisation. So I'm just wondering if you could talk at all about in any of these spaces where the kind of blank slate is a way to be creative, what kinds of ways can we think about constraint as being creatively generative in these spaces? Great question. do the fixed seats push the Vision Festival to do something interestingly different than they might otherwise have done? Or I think you get what I'm getting at.
I do. So, and I'm rehashing stuff from my book here, so I apologize for that. But one argument that I make there is that the loft scene develops a musical aesthetic that's markedly different from other avant-garde scenes. Like, it's very different. The New York musicians from like the early 70s are very different from the musicians coming up in Chicago or St. Louis or Los Angeles. And I do argue that perhaps one reason for this has to do with the kind of spaces they had, because this unique moment in which in New York it was possible to get a space and own that, or not own because they never fully owned them, but to have control over a space for an extended period of time where you were minimally limited in terms of what you did, how long you did it, and even sound issues, because the neighborhood was largely abandoned other than artists for a period of this. So what this means is that, like within the AACM, for instance, they're still organizing a lot of their activities through the logic of the concert, where they're renting a hall or have a time at a community center and they're printing programs. And if you got a spot for it, okay, you're from 8 to 8:45, and then there's another band coming on next, so you have to keep moving. In New York, an aesthetic developed that some people loved and some people absolutely hated, called energy music, which is just very open sessions that are very free, very abstract, no tunes that could go on for hours. And I think infrastructurally, that's something that was enabled by this particular lack of constraint in New York for a small period of time. And still to this day, people will talk about that distinction between New York energy artists and avant-gardists coming from other places. That's the most specific instantiation I can think on that question for strain. Thank you. Oh,
Hey, Michael.
Monty, hey, how you doing?
I'm so glad you brought up Sun Ra, because that was echoing through my head.
Yeah.
People were speaking, space is the place, space is the place. But there might be something to it,
There is,
that,
yeah. I didn't mean to be dismissive of it. I just thought that we were all going to be saying it.
I mean, even in the wordplay, that space is the, space or space making is the place where these kind of improvisations can take place. But to your point about improvisation, and also echoing Christy's question, I was talking with my students yesterday about improvisation in the context of Toni Morrison's novel Jazz, and part of what I was trying to get them away from, and they were a little hostile to this idea that like improvisation is not just doing whatever. Something about that was very comforting to them. But then the idea of constraint did come up, right? And another way we talked about that is context, and like Hetty Fox, for example, like the context of so-called urban renewal in the Bronx,
Right.
and those kind of constraints, historical constraints, but also formal ones, like you have a certain amount of time to do this. So I mean, this is just for you to expand on like how you're thinking about improvisation. Especially in the context of like these historical moments that you've been talking about.
Thank you. So, I mean, as many people are talking about, improvisation is such a broad term that can encompass so many different musical traditions, and there's always that balance between, what are the structures in place, and then where can you push against those structures, right? And this is as true in flamenco and straight ahead jazz and anything you can imagine. And I think that's often when people critique this New York Energy School, that's a basis for their critique, that there's not, sometimes they use constraints, sometimes they use discipline, sometimes they use references to tradition, even though the musicians themselves would very much see their work as embedded within a tradition of jazz and black music making more broadly. That's a very sort of general answer, but I think that it is useful in all cases, including this one, to sort of think through, to not imagine that any artist is just purely following the muse of their art, that there's always going to be some sort of logistical or infrastructural considerations that impact the way that art emerges in the way that it does.
That's what I was getting at. Like,
Yeah.
there's always a problem. Is being solved or addressed or.
Yeah. I mean, is it a problem? I mean, I guess the other way to think of it, because I think it's only a problem if people can push back, I'm extemporizing, but it's only a problem if you imagine this sort of heroic romantic idea of the artist, right? If you imagine the artist as always already functioning within a community setting, doing their art for something and for someone, then a constraint doesn't have to be a limitation. It can be an empowerment. It can add to the impact and function of that art. John. Yes.
I mean, I think it's true of these spaces because the neighborhood was in flux.
Yeah.
And these are like operating almost like speakeasies were operating.
Definitely.
In the sense that legally, could they really be occupying the space at the volume they were? What were the fire exits? All the other things that once it became a marketable neighborhood were structures that were going to be imposed that had money costs. They have these huge spaces they couldn't imagine to get compared to an apartment.
Yeah.
Well, that's in a certain way they were some outlaws in a certain way to even get to the space.
Yeah. No, and that the illegality actually impacts what I was talking to Imani about in terms of the openness of the structure. Because in the early years of the movement, they were not there legally. That literally the buildings, the story of it, the sort of cliff notes, is that the neighborhood had been rezoned. The neighborhood hadn't been rezoned, so it was still zoned as an industrial neighborhood, but industry had moved to larger automated factories outside of the city. So they had these owners and landlords who had these open spaces, and they didn't know what to do with them. And so they let artists come in illegally, pay bottom dollar rent because none of it was legal. And that's what enabled a large part of this. Eventually, and where the irony comes is that the artists lobbied for their own legalization, and then once it was legalized, then all of a sudden the landlord said, hey, this is legal now, we can charge market prices for this neighborhood that is also a hip neighborhood because it's had artists here for the last 20 years. So they sort of priced themselves out of it. But yeah, the legality, illegality. And it also raises, I think it was Christy J talking about the idea of the sort of like guerrilla drawing upon structures of power, that over and over there were stories about people tapping into phone lines to use a payphone for free or getting free power from this. It was it was really, a jungle at that point, and people did what they could to survive with minimal income. Yeah. Kim, yeah.
This is all super fun to think about. Thank you so much.
I appreciate that.
I'm still with you, and I think you could go like just a little bit further until you run into a wall that would be interesting to deal with. And I'm thinking of some of Tom's work, like what happens when we bring purpose-built jazz spaces into the conversation, like Jazz at Lincoln Center or SF Jazz, and also like all the anxieties that came with those, and also the ways in which there's still constraint, right? Like that there's still music that works there and music that doesn't.
It's true.
So I was just curious what you would say about that kind of
It
thing.
is true, because I had Tom's work in my mind as well, thinking about like your work on Frederick Rose Hall, and I was largely thinking of it. And this is where your question is sort of moving me. Where you think I was largely thinking of it as the exception that proves the rule, because Frederick Rose Hall is very much a place that was fundraised for as a jazz venue, designed as a jazz venue, created acoustically to do a specific kind of work, and that's the kind of thing that almost never is the spaces where music takes place. So, in terms of thinking through that, you would, let's talk more. You'd have to think through really what aspects of improvisation are really embedded in the entire infrastructural and organizational apparatus of Lincoln Center from its inception, which I know in some ways, maybe people don't want to think about because they want to think of Lincoln Center as like the thing, the institution, but it's there. You can break it down in that way as well.
Hey, thank you so much. This is kind of a more mundane question, but can you talk a little bit about the history? I feel like I should know this, but what were the precedents for the New York jazz scene, like in terms of musicians taking control of the business? Like briefly, I know it's a large topic. Like who else was doing it, and who before that?
So, I mean, prior to that, it often gets traced back to things like the Clef Club in the 19-teens, James Reese Europe, locations like that. There's a large number of other sorts of business initiatives, like publishing companies. Gigi Grice had a publishing company. There's record companies that are musician-run. I mean, Mingus's record company and others. There's like Musicraft and Black Swan Records had artist input. In terms of venues, I found less in terms of the actual controlling space, unless, I mean, it sort of depends on what, how you're defining it. I mean, like but that wasn't an ownership situation. I would have to think more. I don't have it at the tip of my head. I was about to say, what's that?
Rent parties seem like should be part
That's true. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. That's a good point. The rent party, I think they give it. And I just did the thing that I think was critiqued earlier in terms of only thinking through quote unquote official things as opposed to thinking about community-based organizations and community-based festivals. So there's more to say about that, and I apologize I don't have more at the tip of my tongue.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Our next presenter is John T. Reddick, and obviously we're going to go past 5 o'clock. I don't have many closing remarks, so we'll let John Reddick be the main last word and try not to infringe upon his time. And I hope, I crave your indulgence that you can stay here another 15 or 20 minutes past 5 o'clock. John T. Reddick is an architectural preservationist, historian, and Harlem resident. Currently he serves as the Director of Community Engagement Projects for the Central Park Conservancy. His knowledge of Harlem's culture and architecture has served to advance several public art and open space projects in that community, which include the Ralph Ellison Memorial, Harriet Tubman Square, and the Frederick Douglass Memorial and Circle. At present, under a grant from the Mellon Foundation, Reddick is engaged with the Conservancy in advancing public discussion around the history of Seneca Village, a predominantly African-American pre-park community, as a foundation toward public commemoration of that community. As a Lelia Bundles Community Scholar at Columbia University, he advanced his research profiling Harlem's Black and Jewish music culture, ragtime to jazz, 1890 to 1930. Curating from that scholarship and his collection, the exhibition Illustrating Tin Pan Alley from Ragtime to Jazz at the Society of Illustrators. Mr. Reddick's love of architecture, African American culture, and history have been conveyed through tours, articles, and lectures he's provided for the Studio Museum in Harlem, the Museum of Modern Art, the New York Historical Society, the Metropolitan Museum, and other institutions. Reddick received his Bachelor of Science in Architecture from Ohio State University and a Master of Architecture from Yale University. Please welcome John Reddick.
Well, I realize we're all here because we love music and we love jazz, but even more than that, I love Harlem. I love it even more than I love Columbia. and it's really interesting to listen to everyone talk, to know how so many influences and players that you're talking about really resided in Harlem or engaged in Harlem or the creation of music. Even to listen to the Loft story and thinking about like illegal spaces and not grand concert halls like Lincoln Center, but the smaller spaces in Harlem that really created 20th century music. And so in my research, I really started looking at beyond the architecture, because I realized the architecture, if you look at the parade after the First World War, or Marcus Garvey parading, they're not parading in front of ghetto, they're parading, the boulevard streets. The soldiers are coming back from the First World War probably saying, shit, our neighborhood looks like Paris. It's like they've been somewhere and realized they have something special. The Garvey marches, he's marching in front of buildings that are empire, the same as the Archduke Ferdinand's photographs of him climbing stairs or in front of palatial buildings that existed for him. And so this is a mapping of all the different clubs done by E. Sims Campbell, African-American illustrator. And I just love it because it's got all the sort of fun play of like all the different sites, from Gladys Bentley, shows her in her tuxedo, to the new police station has a black and white cop playing cards and asking for what the number is. And there's a kind of play and a rhythm, the secondary stories behind so what makes the music, but there's also an intimacy of neighborhood and navigating the streets and finding the little side places and the main places. So yes, you have the Apollo and you have Connie's Inn and the Lafayette Theater, but you also have these other levels of clubs and rent parties and things that we're talking about. And so I'm familiar with Maxine Gordon. I sent her this picture because I was walking down the street and a block south of what had been the Lafayette Theater. There was some construction, and there was a whole series of posters says "Jazz is dead, jazz is dead," on a street that once really fostered music. And I had to start thinking about what was gone. We're all talking about as historians, and we're sort of dwelling a lot on the past. And for me, my work has been really about facilitating like resource to opportunity. And I look at Harlem, and I tell all my friends, I said, Harlem is a brand greater than Chanel. And I really treat it like that. I've been really rewarded because I treat it like that. And I feel in lots of ways, some of the stories I'm going to tell you about the different businesses, that there's like a singular focus and not this bigger focus of what is space supposed to be, or what spaces work? How can you build a system? Even during the Harlem Renaissance, the visitors from the outside are what made it possible for people to do things. That extra icing on the cake in terms of revenue or whatever was something that was facilitated in ways that's not really happening, even as we look at singular venues. So you can look at the Savoy, the Cotton Club, Connie's Inn, St. Nick's Pub, Small's Paradise, Gladys Graham's House, Lucky's Rendezvous, Minton's, Lennox Lounge. A lot of these, they're all gone, and a few of them existed while I was, in the time since I've lived in Harlem. I came in 1980. So I want to talk a little bit about that. We're talking about the acoustics, we're talking about size of venue. I really feel there's a sense of hospitality as a part of it. You're bringing people together where you're talking about the open street or the play street or whatever. There was somebody, Professor Fox was a host to the block. She did something that's going to make other people feel like someone really cares, is making an effort. And one of my favorite places was the Lennox Lounge. And you think about tourists coming to Harlem, and even in the down periods or whatever, there's certain places like you're nervous, you come from France, you want to come to Harlem, you get off the A train at 125th Street, you see the Apollo sign, okay, I'm in the right spot. Your anxiety is kind of assuaged. And on Lenox Avenue, I felt the Lennox Lounge did that. You came out, you kind of knew, okay, you got your bearings, you feel a little bit better now, I'm gonna try out this club. And then and talking about architecture, it's a model that was all over the city, a bar and a place to eat. You know, there must have been thousands upon thousands of them. This is one of the few that survived into the 80s. And it had the great, it's enameled metal front, the scale of the signage. You had a lot of the old original furniture, everything. It's where Billie Holiday had a table. This is where Billie Holiday sat. It's where Malcolm X was interviewed by Alex Haley. It was like a neighborhood spot that you could feel like if you had friends with, you could kind of slip in and have an enjoyable time. And so much so that when the empowerment zone came along, it was a federally funded program. It was one of the places, this is a place where, you know, for tourism and everything, we have to really revive it. And he got all this money to actually restore it, you know, take all the tar and nicotine. Everything was like sparkling again, because it had years and years of built up of cigarette smoke. There was a bar space to the front and some booths and tables. And then the back room had banquettes, and it was where they did the live music performance. But it was so unique in being like one of the few places like that survived. It was used for movies, it was used for fashion shoots and all that. And he so lovingly restored the place, but he was a tenant. He wasn't the owner, had a lease. And then a point came where he was renegotiating the lease. And, a lot of the bar owners in Harlem were former cops who, it was easy for them to get a liquor license, they're retiring young, they have a little kitty of money, but they're the last guy to be hospitable. It's not the personality that's gonna, you know, I have a great thing, and you can't tell me I don't have a great thing. So he argued with the landlord when Lenox Social opened up, when Harlem Social, what's the street? I think it's called Harlem Social. It opened up originally as Lenox Social. He spent legal money to go intimidate the new owner to take that name and change the name. But legally, he wasn't doing the things he needed to do. Zoning was changing on 125th Street. When zoning comes to take a look, they ask the public, were you interested in landmarking? And they let you say anything you want, because zoning's gonna go through way before landmarking goes through. And that's what happened here. All of a sudden now, the upzoning on 125th Street, he's not getting along with the landlord. I think Marcus Samuelson, he would say, Marcus Samuelson came in here, tried to get my business, this one wants to do this. Instead of partnering and realizing what he had, he was stubborn to the end. And then he told me he had places out in Las Vegas or whatever, wanted to sort of take his name and use it for little club spaces and all that. And I knew someone who had been his manager, and when I told her that, she says, no, we own the name. And he had someone that worked for him to actually acquire the copyright with him. And when I mentioned it to him, he had to say, oh, yeah. So he was already hamstrung, and a lot of this raising his stubbornness. I went to his closing party on New Year's Eve. The next day, he took all the stuff off the front of the building. He thought he could take it somewhere else. He went to court. They made him give it back. The next owner never built out the space, and eventually it was demolished, and now we see Wells Fargo. And so there's Columbia as a preservation school. All the things we're talking about, there's a lot of levels of engagement that your scholarship and knowledge can do to help someone see the light of what it takes to go forward. Maybe he's not going to be the greatest person about writing a preservation document, but they have a preservation school that's supposed to be the banner school of preservation, not to think about doing studies and stuff and not giving back a certain way to the community. You're on the shores of a very famous community. How can you enhance and dialogue through your skill sets that do more? And then this is Miles Davis with Sonny Rollins. Sonny Rollins grew up in Harlem, an area of Sugar Hill. Miles Davis started to hear Sonny Rollins. He became an early fan of Sonny Rollins. He started to come up to Sugar Hill and hang out at the different club spaces and play music. And one of those places was St. Nick's Pub. Now, that was here. I moved in 1980, so again, I can kind of speak to this because I went there. Then in my research, I'm looking at Harlem's Black and Jewish music culture from ragtime to the jazz era. And so Lucky Roberts came up in some of my research, and I saw he owned this, people started remembering him in the neighborhood, older people said, oh yes, he did very well, he got this bar, became sort of a hangout. Later on, people like Marlon Brando and people would come up to the event. So it has this history going back to a stride piano player. The short guy is Lucky Roberts. the gentleman next to him in the hat is Willie the Lion Smith and Maxine Sullivan. This is the album cover. They're shot on Lenox Avenue. But when I stopped going to St. Nick's Pub, jazz musicians would come play for virtually nothing, whatever, but my foot was ready to go through the floor. It's like, no, if it means that much to us, there has to be a certain sense of investment. And at my job, we have a young man who's from Pratt, and he says he's studying black space. He was going on about black space. Well, black space to me might be the Apollo, or I go to Abyssinian Baptist Church, that might be a black space. It's not just a black space, it's a shared space. And I have a certain, my grandmother expected me to dress a certain way if I went to church, whether I'm black or I'm coming, or an Italian coming. There's a kind of ritual to the space that if you honor the space, you step up and do that. And I started to resent that I'm going to a place where the person knows he's got something that's attracting somebody and doing nothing to really invigorate it. And the list, again, a list of jazz people that were associated with that place. This is a landmark block. And so it was able to work around a lot of the landmark laws to keep the signage and stuff that they had. And then they're shooting a movie. They're trying to, I think it was closed for a while because it lost its liquor license or whatever, had not renewed its liquor license, but they leased it out for someone to rent the movie. You can't really see in the picture, but they actually, this sign that's empty, they actually incorporated a red rooster in this sign for the movie to try to hint that it was like a red rooster jazz club. But it catches fire. It really goes throughout the whole building. And this is what we have now. And as an architect, I know because this is barrel vaulted, this front, that the building facade could have stayed. But a fireman died. There was no, push to save the building. So this is the way it looks today. So when you think about the fabric of the community and the story you want to tell, the things you want to do, there's a lot of other resources that could come to bear that make the right thing happen. And those things seem to never be coalescing around African-American communities. There's all these competitions for other things. If we really say we care about something, it shouldn't just be the political caring about something. It's got a feeling, how do we muster our resources? And I work for the Central Park Conservancy, and I say, I'm lucky I work where my reparations are parked. I'm talking to you because I'm invited where my reparations are parked at Columbia University. And so if we're making relationships, I'm here because Tom really wants to make a core course offering for the Columbia core students. I talk to people who go to Columbia, they're ready to graduate. They never went down on the shores of where the great writers and people navigate. How could you be a great artist and be here for 4 years in the art program and never take a picture? Never, it's like, even if you become great, someone will question the fact that you spent 4 years and you never took a look at one of the most famous places. Because instead of walking away from what Harlem has to offer, really to look at the richness and variety that the culture has. This is Minton's. This is another one. Empowerment Zone money comes along. Minton's, it's all still there. Across the street was a church, so it took a long time for them to figure out how to get a liquor license. Now the Catholic Church has sold the building. The church is pretty much demolished. But this sign is now in the museum in Washington, D.C., in the African American Museum. So it's not even on the street. They did restore, there was a mural to the back where the musicians played. They did restore that. But he decided he was going to make it like a really high-end, jazz music venue. And so it was very expensive. He had a house band that was obviously a house band. And I always tell people, I went to the Carlisle and I paid through the nose when I sat at the bar, but I was seeing the dinosaurs before they died. I was willing to spend that money because I felt I'm going to see somebody in their talent that I might never see again. The person who's curating, if you're going to charge that money, there are so many people, talented people in Harlem who've been in theater, been in jazz, that just want a nice place to play music. They're not trying to they don't want to make $1 million. It's like seeing Alberta Hunter at the Cookery or whatever. They want to be able to go to a nice place, be able to eat a meal after they're finished, invite a couple of friends to a nice place to hear music. And so again, here we have like a unique history, a real investment. Government money went into, again, under the empowerment zone, to bring it around. But the host, the curator of this space, not thinking, how do I juggle these things to really make it work? And so there's a stepping back and looking at all these things, kind of think about, what do we want to keep? It doesn't have to stay a church. Churches are empty 6 days a week. One of the things that takes Harlem off the map is there's no regularity. Churches are popular because every Sunday if you go, there's a church. But whether it's a festival or something, the regularity of knowing that information really defeats us because we're not in that system. We have technology people here. We have people who are doing newsletters to the neighborhood and all that. There's ways that the students and other people within the culture can know more about what's going on. And so I move in to talk about now the places that are working and what I sort of think are working about that. And so now I say jazz is ad. Jazz is ad hospitality. Ad, like, who is your client? Who is he? Like the loft guy, he's got this big space now. He's thinking about how to make a little money on the side, maybe to pay the little rent that he has to pay. But he knows he can take 50 people will fit here. People are feeling like little renegades because they're going down there. There's some mystique that you're marketing and thinking about how do you do that. So this is Scribers Row. And this is Noble Sissel parked in front of what was his house and music store. On the street level was his music store. And he was in the First World War in the regiment with James Fitzgerald. You guys know all this, the Shuffle Along. He wrote Shuffle Along. And he traveled to Europe. And this is how it looked. And still looks pretty much the same. This newsstand is gone. But it's across the street from Abyssinian Baptist Church, is on the street across the street. When Adam Clayton Powell was the pastor, he was also the congressman. And so as a congressman, he could not do government business in church. So when he finished preaching the sermon, if he wanted to do business, they would go across the street. I met an elderly gentleman from Africa, and he said he'd come, and then his visa had expired, and someone says, oh, you need to go talk to Adam Clayton Powell. He said he came up to church and said, oh, you need to go across the street. And he said, Red Rooster, Adam Clayton Powell, his staff will all sit there, and oh, you want to see so-and-so about this? Go see Betty at table 5. And he said it was efficient. It worked. The guy said his problem was solved. So, but this was called the Red Rooster. When I came, the rooster sign was still swinging. Even though the Red Rooster wasn't there, it was a Jamaican restaurant in that space. But now, Marcus Samuelson comes along. He had a restaurant downtown called Aqua V. All these wealthy people thought, oh, was this great guy. Marcus, what do you want to do next? I'm sure they were shocked as hell that he said Harlem. But he had all sorts of resources. And he did all the investigations so he would outright own the name Red Rooster. So I'm sure the same thing that the gentleman who owned Lenox Lounge did to the other restaurant. I'm sure plenty of people went into Marcus Samuelson's and said, my uncle owned the Red Rooster, how can you use that name? My aunt, my cousin, he could just smile at them because he's done business, And he's got the ability, which a lot of others don't, is to promote and advertise at a variety of venue places. He's got the restaurant upstairs, he's kind of moved the music around, you can do music upstairs. Downstairs, you can rent out, it can be enlarged or reduced in terms of space. It's a nice, you feel like you're being accommodated. You're paying a little more, but you feel like you're getting a little more. And again, this takes somebody to really think about that. It's not, you're taking in the music, but you're taking in the music in a certain way that's related to the space. And it can vary. I don't think there's one formula fits all. It's about thinking about what do I have as a resource? How can I keep this resource? Maybe you really got a super cheap rent. So make sure you have the lease for an amount of time that you can grow and all of that. And one of my favorite places is the Shrine. And the Shrine there was a local development group called the Black United Fund. And they took the D out of fund, and then later on you see the guy gets the glory, and they got the Shrine banner, and it moves up. But here, there was an West African influx to Harlem. I could start to see in the dress, my mother would say, you can't mix plaids, you can't do this, you can't do that. Then you would see these women going to mosque or sort of fabulous clothes. I knew in a year it was going to be on the cover of Vogue. I know, the designers, Calvin Klein, they're walking around all in black. but their antennae are picking up what's different. And that difference becomes fashionable and became an outpost for the West Africans in the community because they come hang out, come talk, whatever. So it started to have like the way I would have gone to the village and feel like, oh, they're a little different, they're the same. So other people in the community start thinking, what's so special about this place? What's going on? And then he really exalted Fela Kunte. He took the name Shrine. They had the show, the play, you know, that focused on his life and everything. And they've been really good online and other places about promoting their business. And then it's magical inside. When they first opened, they just took record covers and wallpapered the interior with record cover. It's a basic, you know, just wood floor, tables, and music. He's got an iconic poster of Fela. You go by in the day, he lists the performers that are going to be there at night. So it's a fun venue for the musicians and artists. It's a chance to have a sort of sizable little audience. Technically, it's set up, you know, really well. Just, you know, you hear music and all that. And sometimes you go in there, it's packed with people. And it's not always about the spit and polish of the place, but a sense of authenticity, the sense you're going somewhere where you're going to get really kind of mix. So it's like, to me, it's like Harlem's Greenwich Village. Like all the places in Harlem where you feel like young people, if someone 20 years old asks you where they should go, that's where I would point them, because I know something on the agenda they'll like, you know, and it'll be affordable. Another place I like a lot is the American Legion Post. And now I'm in my 70s. And so I would be probably the Vietnam War veteran person. I guess there's some older people, even older than that, but they own the building. You know, they own the building. And I love that it has the old signs. God forbid they should want to change. Part of its authenticity is a certain kind of datedness about the aspect. Here's the interior. They have like, if you ever be on an airplane, they give you liquor. That's the size of the little liquor bottle they sell you for like $5. And Betty pours it in a glass for you. And some nights they have fish fry nights. Some nights they have something. They have a backyard you can go out to. I love like, all these musicians when they're photographed. It's like an insignia. Anybody's doing, all the young kids are doing all these like postings and everything. They have a brand that they're pumping out there in ways that maybe they weren't even conscious of it. But now, anytime anybody plays there, or someone has a great time from Finland or South Africa, and they're sending that picture out, they're branding that location in ways. And so thinking about all those things, they need other people. They may come with one idea, but how do you enrich that idea? What is it you're trying to give people, a mix of real neighborhood people and visitors? And both sides are happy with that. You know. And the other place is the New Amsterdam Music Association. It's a smaller venue in terms of music. Again, it gets a lot of visitorship. This block's just been made a landmark, and working with a Harlem-based preservation group, they just got money to do facade work. They got a violation for the facade, need to get facade work done and all that. And again, you go in there, you feel the real authenticity. And one of the founders, I think it's over 100 years old, was James B. Sharp. So the organized musicians, you couldn't play if you weren't part of a union, and blacks weren't part of a union, so they created their own union, I think in 1923. 1923. And again, it's like you go there and you feel the authenticity of the place. And I think when people come from other places, I don't think every place in Harlem, your foot should be going through the floor. Some people think, oh, this is only authentic if it's really beat up. But I think the authenticity can come in other ways. The sense that other people come there and really enjoy it and all of that. This is one of my 5 favorite places, 555 Edgecombe. It was so famous in terms of prominent black people that lived there. You said you could be downtown and you say 555 Edgecombe, they go the triple nickel. But every Sunday at 4 o'clock, there's a woman who, her son passed away, and her way of mourning, Marjorie Elliott, was to start doing music concerts. And if you come from another place, every Sunday at 4 o'clock, her door is open. If she'll play for 2 people or a packed apartment. Again, the repetition of certainty, and just like the church is being open every Sunday, this woman's up online, whatever place you find her, it's still the same time. She didn't change it every week. And there's this kind of generosity. You're coming into her home. This is the lobby. So now you're not only are you coming to that doorway, this could be Rome or Paris, So you're going to this, you go to the door, they buzz you in, and you walk through this lobby that's obviously of the 20s of an earlier period. So already before you even get on the elevator to go up to the apartment, you're feeling a sense of time and past. There's a kind of luster that you're in. And maybe it could be buffed up a little more, but the fact that it actually has a little age and patina to it, the reality of where you're going. And then she must be loved by her neighbors because they let her do it. And so then you go from here to the floor, you go down the hallway, you're in a typical apartment. And then here's one of Margie Ellison pictures of her. Someone just did a documentary of her. Think of I saw this show about the Harlem Renaissance. You could be painting that now. You could be, look at the colors in that background. You just went there and decided, I want to do Marjorie Elliott, whatever. There's things that you'd be drawing from as an artist, a creative person, documented today. Only difference between today and now is the energy. It's the energy that we're documenting. I love the architecture. And I first looked at the architecture, and the architecture meant more to me when I felt, the energy that was in that space. And there's a reason, and this would have been a building that would have had the rent parties because it's a big apartment, so they have big enough room to have a room where there's the food, a room where there's this or that, and help meet the rent by having the rent party. So you get a real sense of, if I was making a movie or writing a book and wanted to think about the Harlem Renaissance, what was the rent party like? I would say, go to her apartment. And you're sitting in all different parts of the apartment. So sometimes you're sitting in the hallway looking into the space, sometimes you're in the room. It has a different feeling, a different light, a different color, depending where you are. And she gets people from all over the world. Some kid, a trumpet player from Japan, maybe she'll let me play, and they sit there till she lets them come on. So everyone's walking away with like a Harlem memory that's like authentic. It's about the music, it's about the culture, but it's also about enjoying one another, the community of one another. And this is a restaurant on 119th Street. This shit was called Billy's Black, and now it has a music there called the Nephew Supper Club. But I was one of the founding members of Harlem Pride, LGBT group in Harlem. We were founded in 2010. And Adrian, it feels like it sometimes. And this is Adrian Ferguson. Now she opened it as Billy's Black. She was there before the Pride. And when Harlem Pride decided they wanted to have their first Pride celebration, you couldn't get, because of 9/11, they weren't giving out new permits for space. So we talked to some ladies on the block. This gentleman was a gallery owner of the space on the block. And they said, well, maybe we could talk to the ladies if we could claim one of their date to have an event. So we had our first Pride event on 119th Street between 5th and Lenox. Adrian was already there, so she was helping make the relationships happen for us to get the permits and all. But she must have the liquor license, and she must have the lease. And it's because when she gets tired of it, she might sell it out to a partner or whatever. But she's back, she comes back, different iterations of the same spot. 2 weeks ago, I'm walking by with some friends, and she sees me, she taps on the window, and I go in. She, oh, you have to go. Fabulous music downstairs. She has a restaurant upstairs. And here she looks, when I went to the restaurant, she had a white shirt on and a vest. She looked just like Gladys Bentley. So the sense of and it's a very fluid audience in terms of the crowd if you go there. So again, this sense of, and in history, Lorenz Hart lived on this block. I know the new owners, they were talking, I haven't seen the movie yet. They say it's really good about Ethan Hawke is in it or whatever. But they had the same doorknob. It's a Victorian style doorknob. He touched that doorknob. I see the movie Words and Music, and Mickey Rooney's playing Lorenz Hart. And he says, oh, to Richard Rogers, he says, oh, come, I'll play a song for you. And in the movie, they're in like a palace. I can go in that house and see the real room they went into. And Richard Rogers lived on 120th Street, the exact same spot is Lorenz Hart on 119th Street, and they never knew one another till they were introduced to college. One went to the big synagogue on Lenox Avenue, and Lorenz Hart went to a church that had been converted to a synagogue where Milton Berle, Georgie Jessel, and all of them were bar mitzvah. You know, so I could walk across that street. We went to, what was the restaurant we went to? Oh, the Good Good on Park and 119th Street. I was just walking my friends, pointing out, oh, do you see the Star of David incorporated in this architecture? Here's Lorenz Hart lives, whatever. And we get to 7th Avenue, oh, there's Billy's Black, and that music. So I could have done a walking tour of just that block. So the culture is so rich in that sense of intermingling. Neighborhoods don't change overnight. So all those Jewish musicians, they own venues or whatever, they were engaged as the neighborhood changed with all these other players. There's a richness in that story that I feel the fabric of the community really offers. It is the Chanel. It has all those roots to do it really great, but it takes a sharing of resources. Some of your knowledge could help write proposals for people to get grants. There's a place you really like to go to, and it is like the music group, the Veterans Place. If you really like it, there's something, you know, do you have your history written down? Or, I know a place where you can get a grant. I've done really well in life just by asking everybody, just do a little more. Together and just do a little more. And we can go so much further. It's not like everybody taking the full load. It's about, I have some skill set here, you know, there'll be a national grant, you know, for black churches or whatever. And I realized 10,000 people are applying for that, but there's a language to the grant. And you might think you're going to get it, but the person knows the language, how to write the language of the grant is the person who's going to get it. It's not going to change, that world is not going to change overnight. Understanding it, having partners and resources that can. And this is downstairs, this is the club part downstairs, this is a picture of her mother. And it's very intimate, it's pretty much just the bar and music downstairs, and then more of the restaurant upstairs on the street level. And then when YouTube first started, everybody that had something bootlegged, they wanted to show it off. So you could go, you know, now the copyrights closed down a lot of stuff. But I started to see Nina Simone is just fabulous. But it's so beautifully lit, and as an architect, I'm trying to figure out, this is in Mount Morris Park, or Marcus Garvey Park. And I can say, where is this? Where is the stage? I couldn't figure out. This is the hospital building that was on Madison. Demolished. This is where the pool is now. Where the pool is now. It's kind of wonder, they're all up on this hill. I couldn't figure out like how it's where the pool was. But they did it over several summers. It was like on local broadcasts and all, you know, parts of it over the summer. And I tracked down the gentleman who did the concert. And he said, because they had to leave the stage up, he had the Black Panthers as the security was because the stage stayed up. He said he found the stage where he could keep track the sun because he knew it was a long performance. So the beautiful lights you get, I mean, he really thought about that in advance when he was, you know, setting up the stage. And he wanted to do a movie too, but he couldn't get all the rights together. So Questlove goes to Japan. He sees something on some club in Japan, movie clip, goes, what is this, or whatever. And he had the connections to kind of make it happen. But it was Maxwell House was the sponsor. Everyone from like Santana, Stevie Wonder, Mahalia Jackson, Jesse Jackson, Abby Lincoln. It's unbelievable. And they did it for like 3 years. It was around the period when Martin Luther King died, and try to keep the community cool, you know, keep things down. And there's even a picture in the movie. They show John Lindsay coming to the site. And New York didn't have any riots during that period. And part of it was Lindsay's openness and engagement and things with the community. But there's still things like that going on. This is Jazz on the Great Hill. Someone was talking about the open streets. When I first came, they had what they called the Wanger truck. They could set up music in the neighborhood. So the first time I ever saw them, they were in front of Abyssinia Baptist Church. They closed the street, and there was music or whatever. And it would be great if they kind of had that, because that is another way to facilitate. This is a great little block to do this or do changes and stuff. But they do this every year. And again, imagine if you were a tour operator and from Philadelphia, and you say, oh, you want to go see jazz? It's free. You could just bring up a bus of people, charge them for a meal, a meal and travel, make your profit, and just deposit them there for like a great afternoon music. But again, the calendaring of these sorts of things and stuff, like pulling that stuff together so it's a central place to find information and all that is really something Harlem still struggles with. Now this is the Ralph Ellison Memorial. It's in front of Ralph Ellison's apartment building at 150th and Riverside Drive. That's a very young me. Like over 20 years. Yeah, there's Elizabeth Catlett. And we had a competition. The neighbors, Mr. Ellison wanted to do something to honor him. And we raised money for the art, but we had a very supportive elected official to help do the infrastructure. But the space wasn't just about the art, it was about facilitating a space where people could gather and have other activities. So during COVID, just some of the older musicians just started every Saturday or Sunday, a pretty regular schedule. People could socially distance initially, but now almost every weekend there's music up there through the warmer weather. So it's not just about the art, it was about the art and making a space that could accommodate other sorts of engagement. And this is my last slide. But what I love about this is there's a wonderful little restaurant called The Artista. It was opened by I think he was a Dutch flute player who lived in Harlem. He wanted to have a restaurant, but and this plaza is what they called under Bloomberg. They started looking at potential plaza spaces, and they would block them off and see what it did to the traffic. They would measure that, if people really use it. This plaza is partnering with a group called Brotherhood Sister Soul, which is around the corner. So they're sort of the maintainer, provider. So they're testing it out to see, can this work? Can it be turned into a plaza? And they're working with Pratt. And at Pratt, a lot of the practitioners at Pratt work in some aspect of city government. So they're not trying to take the community's time. Let's do a deconstructivist park. Let's do all these things that for his intellectual exercise, that professor might go on to Paris to say he worked with Harlem people. I did a deconstructivist design that never got built. At Pratt, they've kept the community focused on what's possible. And the earlier owner sold the building, sold the restaurant to someone else. And the guy, he's very quiet. He watches everything. And they were blasting music, they play music, whatever. He said, well, if they want to use the bathroom, I'll let them use the bathroom. When he has music, he opens the doors, and so his music goes out as free to them as it was then. Now you don't have that. You go in the evening, you see women and children hanging out. This is the drug corner on the other side. So all that's, it took time, but I'm just saying there's a level of engagement. He's trying to get other restaurateurs on the stretch where it is. And it's evolving into a really unique place. It's everybody doing a little bit more than they did before. So Pratt will have a great story. He'll have a great restaurant business, hopefully. And the community will get something that they've bought into, that they've been part of the evolution of the neighborhood. And this singer, this is like inside the restaurant looking out to the plaza. And this is Georgia here. And she was in Good Night, Good News. If you could get a ticket, it was $700. I could sit in here and play music 3 Sundays ago. I put something in the tip jar, and but she had a place she could eat. She was with her guitarist, and for her, this was like, it was a chance for her to try something different, not a really demanding program to do. But you see, she was enjoying it as much as I was enjoying it. And I feel like that's the challenge as we look at the neighborhood. There's all these different things that you've all talked about, all the different spaces, all those things have a certain kind of light. The gentleman was here earlier from the Apollo Theater. It's like this archive, another person from the West Harlem Art Fund. There's things that we could be doing together to make Columbia look like it's more embracing of the community. Oh, there you are. I thought you left. There you are. And so there's things they have a great art. He's the archivist for the Apollo Theater. There's great things. And so my energy is like trying to bring people together and try to think of all the intellect that we have. It's all wonderful. I don't want to spend time just bemoaning the past because I really feel there's a great future. Thanks. I'll take a couple of questions. Okay?
I just wanted to say also the spaces that are created in the churches, because you have interfaith that has jazz groups there all the time. So it's not just interfaith. I know there's a couple of them in Harlem that
Yeah,
have
but
different.
more because I think particularly some of the smaller churches, there's 6 days a week they're not open. There'd be great spaces like, say, every Wednesday they have a jazz cafe or something. Then you could put it on a calendar, and someone in Philadelphia or Miami that's booking a trip or whatever starts to know every Wednesday if you go there, you could hear music. And all the music schools around, Manhattan School of Music, a lot of them live in my building and places. They'd love to have like a nice little, all the people want is a nice place to get together and feel, and particularly young people now, I feel like they're so disconnected from like real social engagement and all that. So creating these smaller, intimate places, I think there's great possibilities. So.
Hey, I have a question. Let's see. So I was born here in the city on, I lived on 100th and Central Park West, and my mother would take me to a lot of parades in Harlem. So when we're also talking about space and some of the restrictions of space, I think like the community gathering around the big parade, certainly in Harlem, like brought all people out. Yeah. Right. Can you speak to some of the parades that used to be in some of these areas that have since disappeared?
Well, yeah, I'm not old enough. 'Cause I didn't grow up in New York, so I didn't come here to 19. Yeah, that's come back in a bigger way. That had sort of died out. That's grown back in a bigger way. But again, how can you support it? So if you're going to do that, how can the restaurants get online to make sure, okay, the parade's going to begin and end within a certain time frame, and you're giving out coupons or promoting, so the businesses make something off of it. The guys are struggling, particularly post-COVID. A lot of places had music, and the music really, was starting to be a draw for visitors, and they had to really start to cut back. So thinking where things can ride on the backs of other things, I think it's really important. And that is a big draw. People come from a lot of other places to perform, to participate in it, as well as to see it.
I've been living in New Orleans for a long time, so and I was a sound engineer for a couple of brass bands, but the second line tradition, and I realized like how many different places around the sonic world you have those same kind of ideals, and certainly in Harlem too, but it's like unearthing these like parades.
But think about it, like I've been to New Orleans, and as an architect, I just think it's one of the most magical spaces, and I love the music. But I had a friend down there, Katrina, and I went down and to see the Ninth Ward and everything. And everyone talks about they love the music, but where's the economic return to that cultural gift to the community? I just in a certain way, I feel like it's beautiful. I don't want to fall in love with it. And so many of those musicians after Katrina moved to New York. They could go to a union place and realize what they could get paid, whatever. Grandma can send gumbo, whatever it is, up, or she can come visit. So it's like they're even depleting their own base of talent, because the talent can't really stay there and thrive in the ways they should. There should be 1,000, black-owned, music venues and all of that and stuff like that. And that's not really in their hands. It's like the public demonstration of it, but the sense of real monetary stability. If you really want it to last, you have to have some projection of what's going to give me stability. So.
Actually did something this past year where they had a second line parade, but it was like for a second, it was amazing because they went from the restaurant to like the pub,
Right.
and it was, you could join it. And I'm sorry, I always think I'm too loud for a mic, but they had that come through. But it was once a year when they had when St. Nick's Pub burned down, they had a second line memorial, and it was like in the middle of the night. It was awesome.
Well, I really admired Marcus Samuelson. I was in a discussion that was going on with Marcus Samuelson, and he was talking to Dapper Dan, and he was saying, talking about coming to America or whatever, and he says he did really well in school, and chef in school or whatever, and when he told this professor at the end he had what he wanted to do in Scandinavia, where he's from, the guy said, I don't think so, and he went home and told his father. And his father says, well, you don't have to do it here, you can do a restaurant in America. He said, but I don't know anybody in America. He said, well, go to New York. He said, I don't know anybody in New York either. He said, if there was a black mayor in New York, if he can be a mayor, you can be a chef.
Amen. Amen.
And when you travel the world, the image of freedom and liberty that defines America is the black experience. Yeah. Because you're in France and you're watching CNN, and there's a fire in Chicago, and all of a sudden they interview the fire chief. Oh, he's black. Or a famous city, always black. You know, or President of the United States, always black. They know we've had a hard time, but whether you're Mexican or German or Honduran or whatever, you look at that and say, it's possible for me. And so what we're going through now, one of the biggest resentments I have from now, and under this administration, we're not going to see any money. You might as well just forget for the next 3.5 years, but we can get our shit together. So when the money does come, we know how to write grants, we know how to do the things that's really going to take us to another place. Here's a chance to start mobilizing and doing the things and getting yourself prepared for the next time there is an opportunity, you know. So I'm here, and Tom has shown such great energy. You know, it's just been really amazing. And to sit in on and hearing the other talks and stuff have been really inspired. So I wanted to make it a core course before I go to my grave. But even the fact that the venues will be a chance, we have to decide like how many kids could go, because we don't want to change the complexion of the events they go to. Whether there's 50 Columbia kids and they're just performing for Columbia. We want them to feel authentic experiences. So thinking about what scale that would be, what places they would go to, and all that. So I have great hopes that, you know, we can help you pull it off. All right.
I'm not going to do any real closing remarks, but because we're over time. But I'm so glad that John ended it the way he did. We're going to try to do a lot of the things that he said we should do at 6 o'clock. I'd like to introduce Amanda Humes. She will be the tour guide for the folks that will be joining us on the tour. It has been overbooked for a while, but I do think that anybody that's not registered that has an almost a virtual, very high chance of being able to do it. So please, please, please come to me or Yolanda. Come to me. She looked a little scared when she said that. Come to me. Come to me. Which leads me directly to my second point, which we need like 4 or 5, 6 rounds of applauses for Yolanda McKenzie over here. She is the program coordinator of the Center for Jazz Studies, the heart and soul of everything that we do. And she did such an amazing job today. She's running around letting people in, pushing back against the kind of territorialization of space that Columbia Security has been doing, fighting the good fight, and winning today at least. So thank you. Thanks again. Another round of applause. Thank you to Professor Robert O'Mealy, who's been contributing so much. He's the founding director of the Center for Jazz Studies. We're so lucky to have him here, and my heartfelt thank you to him. And I'd like to thank, he's not here, he was here before, but the previous director of the center, Kevin Velez, who did such a great job. And he's such a great mentor to me in so many ways, far beyond the Center for Jazz Studies, as well as Chris Washburn, Farrah Jasmine Griffin, Brent Edwards, and the other faculty associated with the Center for Jazz Studies. And without further ado, a little clarification. So at 6 o'clock, the jazz tour will leave, and we are going to be meeting outside the gates, so anybody that didn't join here but is still registered should know, and if you're friends with anybody that didn't come here, let them know that you don't need a QR code. We'll be meeting outside the sign for Miller Theater at 6 p.m. I already told you, or at least I told the people on the list that you wouldn't miss Amanda Humes, but now you know who she is, and you really will never miss Amanda Humes. All right, so thank you to the presenters. It was a wonderful evening. Well, morning and evening. Thank you. I appreciate it. And until next time.
How do I eject this? Can I just take it out?
I think you can pop it out. If you're worried, Michael, I'm going to assume he doesn't mind me touching it.
Don't break it.